Some farmers refer to soil as dirt, and others actually treat it like dirt. I don't really like this term for soil because soil is by far and away the farmer's most precious asset. When you go to a farm, don't just judge it on what the buildings look like, or how big his header is, or whether he's got a nice big shiny tractor, because what really counts is the fertility of his soil. Soil is a very complex living biological substance, and it is expensive and difficult to improve. We improve it by using expensive fertilizers and by sowing legume pastures. And slowly we can build up the fertility and get better crops and better pasture production. It's very easy to damage soil, firstly by cultivating it too often or too fast, or by cultivating when the soil is too wet or too dry. But one of the ways in which soil is really badly damaged is if it is blown away or washed away. And this is referred to as soil erosion. Soil erosion didn't occur that much before clearing, when there was native vegetation over the whole landscape. But whenever we clear, either to farm the land or to build roads or railways, or for whatever reason, we expose the soil to the forces of rain and of strong winds. The basic thing you must always remember is that bare soil can wash away or blow away. The slides I'm going to show you will show you how erosion occurs on farms in Western Australia, and also the main places on farms where it's likely to occur. Wind erosion is a problem on bone-dry, sandy soils. Dust storms like this one are most common during the summer on paddocks that are bare of vegetation. They are usually bare at this time of year if the land has been overgrazed by stock, or summer cultivated, or after harvesting of clover seed. During a dust storm, the most fertile part of the soil, the clay and silt particles, are blown into the air. Clay and silt particles are so light that they don't readily settle back onto the ground, and are blown many kilometres from the land where the erosion is occurring. Land that has been wind eroded is not a pretty sight. The bare dry surface is roughened into humps and hollows. When you look closely at the soil surface, you can sometimes find clues as to how much soil has been lost. In this case, the plant roots which are exposed show that 2 centimetres of soil have been lost from this paddock of 80 hectares. This amounts to a soil loss of 21,000 tonnes. As most of the soil's fertility is held in the top 10 centimetres, at a rough guess, a fifth of this land's fertility has been lost. The heavier particles of soil, the coarse sand, are too heavy to blow into the air, but they still move by bouncing across the surface of the land. This sand comes to rest once it meets a barrier, in this case a fence. During bad storms, fences can be completely buried and dams filled with sand. Wind erosion is mainly a problem in the flat and gently rolling sandplain areas. Now to the problem of water erosion. Water erosion starts with the hammering action of raindrops on a bare soil surface. During a heavy storm, raindrops hit the soil at speeds of up to 40 kilometres per hour. Particles of clay and silt are broken off the soil crumbs, and as the raindrop explodes, are thrown up to 60 centimetres into the air. When these fine particles drop back to the ground, they tend to clog up the air spaces in the soil surface. This sealing or capping slows down the rate at which the rainwater soaks into the soil. As a result, more rainwater tends to run over the soil surface. It's this runoff that starts to wash the soil away. This slide shows a soil clod from a paddock shortly after a heavy thunderstorm. The soil was bare, and the sealing of the soil surface is easy to see. The clod looks more like a piece of concrete than soil. This clod was dug up close to the previous one, and yet it is not sealed. The soil surface is still open and friable and able to soak up water readily. Why the difference from the last slide? Well, this area was protected from the hammering of the raindrops by a layer of straw. This shows how important it is to keep the soil surface covered with a living crop or pasture, or the dead remains of a crop, in other words the stubble. Runoff flows over the ground in a thin sheet. It moves very slowly and only carries the very lightest clay and silt particles. It's only when runoff concentrates into channels that it speeds up and its cutting or eroding power builds up. This is a very important fact, and one can say that in general water erosion only occurs where runoff water is concentrated into natural or man-made channels which are bare of vegetation. The next few slides show some of the many places on farms where runoff water is concentrated on bare soil, causing erosion. Firstly, fire breaks, farm roads, wheel tracks, farmyards, paddock headlands, stock pads. The most important place on farms where rainwater is concentrated on bare soil is in the natural hollows or drainage lines, if these are ploughed up during cropping operations. Cultivating and trying to crop these natural waterways is the most common cause of water erosion in the agricultural areas. The first time this happens, shallow gutters or rills are usually formed, as in this slide. These rills should be taken as a warning sign. If they're ploughed in and further cropping of the waterway is attempted, they usually wash out deeper the second time. Eventually they become too deep to cross with machinery and have to be worked around. But by this time the damage has been done and the erosion is through to the subsoil clay, which is usually much more easily eroded than the topsoil. Small gutters develop into small gullies and finally into huge gullies like this one. Once gullies are this large and active, they are very difficult to control. Consequently, large amounts of soil are washed down them every winter. This very active gully cost a farmer who sold the farm $4,000 in 1979. This was the amount the new owner had knocked off the purchase price of the property. This gully is still getting wider and also longer. Very fast cutting back occurs at the many gully heads. This diagram shows more clearly how gully head erosion occurs. Here is a close-up of a gully head with water running over it. Backsplashing causes the subsoil to erode away quicker than the topsoil, and as a result a cave forms. Eventually the roof of the cave breaks off, falls to the gully bottom and is gradually broken up by the waterfall. The water flowing along the bottom of the gully tends to meander or swirl around the corners, undercutting the banks of the gully. When this undercutting has progressed 1 to 1.5 metres, huge chunks of land topple into the gully bottom. Further flows of water then break up the chunks over a period of years, and the soil is washed along the gully. The previous 20 or so slides have shown you what soil erosion looks like, and a little of how and where it occurs on farms in WA. Next, we have to discover what harm it does, and why farmers should make erosion prevention and control an important part of their farming business. If erosion is allowed to continue unchecked, complete loss of fertile topsoil and destruction of land can result. This has occurred in this photograph. Most of the plant food is held in the top 10 centimetres, and once this is lost, crops and pastures will not grow. If even 1 centimetre is lost, crop yields can be reduced by 1/5, and the land takes many years to fully recover. One of the worst aspects of gully erosion is the way it chops paddocks up into small inconvenient pieces. This slide shows an area that has been divided by deep uncrossable gullies into 7 pieces of about 7 hectares each. Cultivation and seeding becomes difficult and slow on land like this, especially if it gets very wet early in the winter. The narrow strip of land in between the 2 main gullies is useless for cropping due to the danger of driving machinery close to the edge. Driving around paddocks to round up stock is very difficult in land with deep gullies like this. All this means wastage of valuable time. So far we have only considered the damage caused by the erosion itself in washing away fertile topsoil and chopping up land into small areas. But what about the soil that's washed away? Where does it end up, and what problems does it cause? Most farm dams are sunk on natural waterways. If these erode into gullies, the soil washed down the waterway often ends up in the bottom of the dam. This picture shows a silt fan in the mouth of a dam, and it is likely that there is just as much soil below the water level. This dam near Narrogin has been completely filled with soil and is now a useless white elephant. In fact, when this photo was taken, the farmer had just sunk a new dam in the waterway a little lower down the hill. The soil which caused this problem came from erosion on a neighbour's paddock in the catchment area of the dam. Eroded soil also ends up against fences, burying them and nearby fertile land. Only the sand is deposited as the fertile clay washes on down to the creeks and rivers. These silt fans make the land unproductive for quite a few years. In bad cases of erosion, the washed soil can even cover public roads, causing a dangerous hazard to traffic and a headache for the local shire councils who have to repair the damage. In the end, a lot of the soil eroded from sloping land ends up in the main creeks and rivers running through flat land. When the creeks become choked with sand, they are less able to cope with the large amounts of runoff during wet winters. More water runs off badly eroded paddocks, and the creeks have less channel capacity to store it in. The result inevitably is more frequent and severe flooding on the valleys in the wheat belt. Controlling both wind and water erosion is vital if we are to ensure the long-term production of our soils.